Okay, we're actually live now. Hello and welcome to the 37th episode of Tuesday Tales of Terror. Tuesday Tales of Terror. I am experiencing major technical difficulties this evening. First, it wasn't registering my camera, and then it said I was live, but apparently I wasn't. So I read for 15 minutes, not realizing that I wasn't live. Anyway, we're back. It says that we're live now, and now at least I have read through some of it so I can know what's coming. So let's not delay this any further. Thank you to my friend who reached out and told me that I was not live. That's helpful. Yes, here we go. Convocation. Here we have a man holding a mug of coffee. A small sign in the hotel lobby announced that the Washington room was taken that night by a private function, although there was no information as to what kind of function this might be. Thankfully, if you were to look at the inhabitants of the Washington room that night, you would have no clearer idea of what was happening, although a rapid glance would tell you that there were no women in the room. They were all men, that much was clear, and they sat at round dinner tables, and they were finishing their desserts. There were about 100 of them, all in sober black suits, but the suits were all they had in common. They had white hair, or dark hair, or fair hair, or red hair, or no hair at all. They had friendly faces, or unfriendly, helpful, or sullen, open, or secretive, brutish, or sensitive. The majority of them were pink-skinned, but there were black-skinned men and brown-skinned. They were European, African, Indian, Chinese, South American, Filipino, American. They all spoke English when they all talked to each other or to the waiters, but the accents were as diverse as the gentlemen. They came from all across Europe and from all over the world. The men in black suits sat around their tables, while up on a platform, one of their number, a wide, cheery man, dressed in a morning suit, as if he had just come from a wedding, was announcing good deeds done. Children from poor places had been taken on exotic holidays. A bus had been brought to take people who needed it on excursions. The man Jack sat at the front center table beside a dapper man with silver white hair. They were waiting for their coffee. "Time's a-ticking," said the silver-haired man, "and we're none of us getting any younger." The man Jack said, "I've been thinking. That business in San Francisco 4 years ago was unfortunate, but like the flowers that bloom in the spring, tra-la-la, absolutely nothing to do with the case. You failed, Jack. You were meant to take care of them all. That included the baby, especially the baby. Nearly only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades." A waiter in a white jacket poured coffee for each of the men at the table. A small man with a pencil-thin black mustache, a tall blonde man good-looking enough to be a film star or a model, and a dark-skinned man with a huge head who glared out at the world like an angry bull. These men were making a point of not listening to Jack's conversation, and instead were paying attention to the speaker, even clapping from time to time. The silver-haired man added several heaped spoonfuls of sugar to his coffee, stirred it briskly. 10 years, he said. Time and tide wait for no man. The babe will soon be grown. And then what? I still have time, Mr. Dandy, the man Jack began, but the silver-haired man cut him off, stabbing a large pink finger in his direction. You had time. Now you just have a deadline. Now you've got to get smart. We can't cut you any slack. Not any more. Sick of waiting we are. Every man Jack of us. The man Jack nodded curtly. I have leads to follow, he said. The silver-haired man slurped his black coffee. Really? Really. And I repeat, I think it's connected with the trouble we had in San Francisco. You've discussed this with the secretary? Mr. Dandy indicated the man at the podium, who was, at that moment, telling them about hospital equipment bought in the previous year from their generosity. "Not one, not two, but 3 kidney machines," he was saying. The men in the room applauded themselves and their generosity politely. The man Jack nodded. "I've mentioned it." "And?" "He's not interested. He just wants results. He wants me to finish the business I started." "We all do, Sunshine," said the silver-haired man. "The boy's still alive, and time is no longer our friend." The other men at the table, who had pretended not to be listening, grunted and nodded their agreement. "Like I say," Mr. Dandy said without emotion, "time's a ticking." Okay, so here we have this beautiful photo of Bod reading a book. Chapter 6. Nobody Owens' School Days. Rain in the graveyard, and the world puddled into blurred reflections. Bod sat concealed from anyone, living or dead, who might come looking for him, under the arch that separated the Egyptian walk and the northwestern wilderness beyond it from the rest of the graveyard, and he read his book. "Damn ye!" came a shout from down the path. "Damn ye, sir, and blast your eyes! When I catch you, and find you I shall make you rue the day you were born." Bod sighed, and he lowered the book and leaned out enough to see Thackeray Porringer, 1720 to 1734, son of the above, come stamping up the slippery path. Thackeray was a big boy. He had been 14 when he died, following his initiation as an apprentice to a master house painter. He had been given 8 copper pennies and told not to come back without half a gallon of red and white striped paint for painting barbers' poles. Thackeray had spent 5 hours being sent all over the town one slushy January morning, being laughed at in each establishment he visited, and then sent on to the next. When he realized he had been made a fool of, he had taken an angry case of apoplexy, which I Googled the last time I was filming this, and it's a burst organ, an internal organ. So he basically got so mad that he burst an organ inside of himself, which carried him off within the week. And he died glaring furiously at the other apprentices, and even at Mr. Horobin, the master painter, who had undergone so much worse back when he was apprentice that he could scarcely see what all the fuss was about. So Thackeray Porringer had died in a fury, clutching his copy of Robinson Crusoe, which was, apart from a silver sixpence with the edges clipped and the clothes he had formerly been standing up in, all that he owned. And, at his mother's request, he was buried with his book. Death had not improved Thackeray Porringer's temper, and now he was shouting, "I know you're here somewhere. Come out and take your punishment, you thief." Bod closed the book. "I'm not a thief, Thackeray. I'm only borrowing it. I promise I'll give the book back when I've finished it." Thackeray looked up, saw Bod nestled behind the statue of Osiris. "I told you not to." Bod sighed. "But there's so few books here. It's just up to a good bit anyway. He's found a footprint. It's not his. That means someone else is on the island." "It's my book," said Thackeray Porringer obstinately. "Give it back." Bod was ready to argue or simply to negotiate, but he saw the hurt look on Thackeray's face and he relented. Bod clambered down the side of the arch, jumped the last few feet. He held out the book. "Here." Thackeray took it gracelessly and glared. "I could read it to you," offered Bod. "I could do that." "You could go and boil your fat head," said Thackeray, and he swung a punch at Bod's ear. It connected and it stung, although judging from the look on Thackeray Porringer's face, Bod realized it must have hurt his fist as much as it hurt Bod. The bigger boy stomped off down the path, and Bod watched him go, ear hurting, eyes stinging. Then he walked through the rain back down the treacherous, ivy-covered path. At one point he slipped and scraped his knee, tearing his jeans. There was a willow grove beside the wall, and Bod almost ran into Miss Euphemia Horsefall and Tom Sands, who had been stepping out together for many years. Tom had been buried so long ago that his stone was just a weathered rock, and he had lived and died during the 100 Years' War with France, while Miss Euphemia, 1861 to 1883, she sleeps, aye, yet she sleeps with angels, had been buried in Victorian times after the graveyard had been expanded and extended and became for some 50 years a successful commercial enterprise, and she had a whole tomb to herself behind a black door in the Willow Walk. But the couple seemed to have no troubles with the difference in their historical periods. "You should slow down, young Bod," said Tom. "You'll do yourself an injury." "You already did," said Miss Euphemia. "Oh, dear Bod, I have no doubt that your mother will have words with you about that. It's not as if we can easily repair those pantaloons." Sorry," said Bod. "And your guardian was looking for you," added Tom. Bod looked up at the grey sky. "But it's still daylight," he said. "He's up betimes," said Bod, a word which Bod knew meant early, "and said to tell you he wanted you, if we saw you." Bod nodded. "There's ripe hazelnuts in the thicket just beyond the Little John's monument," said Tom with a smile as if softening a blow. "Thank you," said Bod. He ran on pell-mell through the rain and down the winding path into the lower slopes of the graveyard, running until he reached the old chapel. The chapel door was open, and Silas, who had love for neither the rain nor the remnants of the daylight, was standing inside in the shadows. "I heard you were looking for me," said Bod. "Yes," said Silas. Then, "It appears you've torn your trousers." "I was running," said Bod. I got into a bit of a fight with Thackeray Porringer. I wanted to read Robinson Crusoe. It's a book about a man on a boat. That's a thing that goes in the sea, which is water like an enormous puddle, and how the ship is wrecked on an island, which is a place on the sea where you can stand. And," Silas said, "it has been 11 years, Bod. 11 years that you have been with us." "Right," said Bod. "If you say so." Silas looked down at his charge. The boy was lean, and his mouse-colored hair had darkened slightly with age. Inside the chapel, it was all shadows. "I think," said Silas, "it's time to talk about where you came from." Bod breathed in deeply. He said, "It doesn't have to be now. Not if you don't want to." He said it as easily as he could, but his heart was thudding in his chest. Silence. Only the patter of the rain and the wash of the water from the drain pipes. A silence that stretched until Bod thought he would break. Silas said, "You know you're different. That you're alive. That we took you in. They took you in here. And that I agreed to be your guardian." Bod said nothing. Silas continued, in his voice like velvet. "You had parents. An older sister. They were killed. I believe that you were to have been killed as well, and that you were not was due to chance and the intervention of the Owenses." "And you," said Bod, who had had that night described to him over the years by many people, some of whom had even been there. It had been a big night in the graveyard. Silas said, "Out there, the man who killed your family is, I believe, still looking for you. Still intends to kill you." Bod shrugged. "So?" he said. "It's only death. I mean, all of my best friends are dead." Bod. "Yes," Silas hesitated. "They are. And they are, for the most part, done with the world. You are not. You are alive, Bod. That means you have infinite potential. You can do anything. Make anything. Dream anything. If you change the world will change. Potential. Once you're dead, it's gone. Over. You've made what you've made. Dreamed your dream. written your name. You may be buried here. You may even walk. But that potential is finished. Bod thought about this. It seemed almost true, although he could think of exceptions. His parents adopting him, for example. But the dead and the living were different. He knew that, even if his sympathies were with the dead. "What about you?" he asked Silas. "What about me?" "Well, you aren't alive, and you go around, and you do things." "I," said Silas, "am precisely what I am, and nothing more. I am, as you say, not alive, but if I am ended, I shall simply cease to be. My kind are, or we are not, if you see what I mean." "Not really." Silas sighed. The rain was done, and the cloudy gloaming had become true twilight. "Bod," he said, "there are many reasons why it is important that we keep you safe." Bod said, "The person who hurt my family, the one who wants to kill me, you're certain that he's still out there?" It was something he had been thinking about for a while now, and he knew what he wanted. "Yes, he's still out there." "Then," said Bod, and said the unsayable, "I want to go to school." Silas was imperturbable. The world could have ended, and he would not have turned a hair, but now his mouth opened, and his brow furrowed, and he said only, "What?" "I've learned a lot in this graveyard," said Bod. "I can fade, and I can haunt, and I can open a ghoul gate, and I know the constellations. But there's a world out there, with the sea in it, and islands, and shipwrecks, and pigs. I mean, it's filled with things I don't know, and the teachers here have taught me lots of things, but I need more, if I'm going to survive out there one day." Silas seemed unimpressed. "Out of the question. Here we can keep you safe. How can we keep you safe out there? Outside, anything could happen." "Yes," agreed Bod. "That's the potential thing you were talking about." He fell silent. Then, "Someone killed my mother, and my father, and my sister." "Yes, someone did." "A man?" "A man. Which means," said Bod, "you're asking the wrong question." Silas raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "Well," said Bod, "if I go outside in the world, the question isn't, who will keep me safe from him?" "No." "No. It's, who will keep him safe from me?" Twigs scratched against the high windows as if they needed to be let in. Silas flicked an imaginary speck of dust from his sleeve with a fingernail as sharp as a blade. He said, "We will need to find you a school." Bod, you're so cute. Okay. Okay. No one noticed the boy. Not at first. No one even noticed that they hadn't noticed him. He sat halfway back in class. He didn't answer much, not unless he was directly asked a question, and even then his answers were short and forgettable, colorless. He faded in mind and in memory. "Do you think they're religious, his family?" asked Mr. Kirby in the teacher's staff room. He was marking essays. "Whose family?" asked Mrs. McKinnon. "Owen's, in 8B, said Mr. Kirby. "The tall spotty lad?" "I don't think so. Sort of medium height." Mrs. McKinnon shrugged. "What about him?" "Handwrites everything," said Mr. Kirby. "Lovely handwriting. What they used to call copperplate." "And that makes him religious because?" "He says they don't have a computer. And he doesn't have a phone." "I don't see why that makes him religious," said Mrs. McKinnon, who had taken up crocheting when they had banned smoking in the staff room, and was sitting and crocheting a baby blanket for no one in particular. Mr. Kirby shrugged. "He's a smart lad," he said. "There's just stuff he doesn't know. And in history he'll throw in little made-up details. Not stuff in the books." "What kind of stuff?" Mr. Kirby finished marking Bod's essay and put it down on the pile. Without something immediately in front of him, the whole matter seemed vague and unimportant. "Stuff," he said, and forgot about it. Just as he forgot to enter Bod's name on the roll. Just as Bod's name was not to be found on the school databases. Oh. The boy was a model pupil, forgettable and easily forgotten, and he spent much of his spare time in the back of the English class, where there were shelves of old paperbacks, and in the school library, a large room filled with books and old armchairs, where he read stories as enthusiastically as some children ate. Even the other kids forgot about him. Not when he was sitting in front of them. They remembered him then. But when that Owens kid was out of sight, he was out of mind. They didn't think about him. They didn't need to. If someone asked all the kids in 8B to close their eyes and list the 25 boys and girls in the class, that Owens kid wouldn't have been on the list. His presence was almost ghostly. It was different if he was there, of course. Nick Farthing was 12, but he could pass, and did sometimes, for 16. A large boy with a crooked smile and little imagination. He was practical in a basic sort of way, an efficient shoplifter, and an occasional thug who did not care about being liked as long as the other kids, all smaller, did what he said. Anyway, he had a friend. Her name was Maureen Quilling, but everyone called her Mo. And she was thin and had pale skin and pale yellow hair, watery blue eyes, and a sharp, inquisitive nose. Nick liked to shoplift, but Mo told him what to steal. Nick could hit and hurt and intimidate, but Mo pointed him at the people who needed to be intimidated. They were, as she told him sometimes, a perfect team. They were sitting in the corner of the library, splitting their take of the year's 7's pocket money. They had 8 or 9 of the 11-year-olds trained to hand over their pocket money every week. "The Singh kid hasn't coughed up yet." Oh, excuse me, it's Mo. "The Singh kid hasn't coughed up yet," said Mo. "You'll have to find him." "Yeah," said Nick. "He'll pay." What was it he nicked? A CD? Nick nodded. "Just point out the error of his ways," said Mo, who wanted to sound like the hard cases from television. "Easy," said Nick. "We're a good team." "Like Batman and Robin," said Mo. More like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde," said somebody who had been reading unnoticed in a window seat, and he got up and walked out of the room. Paul Singh was sitting on a window seat by the changing rooms, his hands deep in his pockets, thinking dark thoughts. He took one hand out of his pocket, opened it, looked at the handful of pound coins, shook his head, closed his hand around the coins once more. "Is that what Nick and Mo are waiting for?" somebody asked, and Paul jumped, scattering money all over the floor. The other boy helped him pick the coins up, handed them over. He was an older boy, and Paul thought he had seen him around before, but he could not be certain. Paul said, "Are you with them? Nick and Mo?" The other boy shook his head. "Nope. I think they're fairly repulsive." He hesitated. Then he said, "Actually, I came to give you a bit of advice." "Yeah?" "Don't pay them." "Easy for you to say." "Because they aren't blackmailing me?" The boy looked at Paul, and Paul looked away, ashamed. "They hit you or threatened you until you shoplifted a CD for them. Then they told you that unless you handed over your pocket money to them, they'd tell on you. What did they do? Film you doing it?" Paul nodded. "Just say no," said the boy. "Don't do it. They'll kill me. And they said..."
Tell them you think the police and school authorities could be a lot more interested in a couple of kids who are getting younger kids to steal for them and then forcing them to hand over their pocket money than they would be in one kid forced to steal a CD against his will. That if they touch you again, you'll make the call to the police, and that you've written it all up. And if anything happens to you, anything at all, if you get a black eye or anything, your friends will automatically send it to the school authorities and the police. Paul said, "But I can't." "Then you'll pay them your pocket money for the rest of your time in the school, and you'll stay scared of them." Paul thought, "Why don't I just tell the police anyway?" he asked. "You can if you like." "I'll try it your way first," Paul said. He smiled. It wasn't a big smile, but it was a smile. Right enough. His first in 3 weeks. So Paul Singh explained to Nick Farthing just how and why he wouldn't be paying him any longer, and walked away, while Nick Farthing just stood and didn't say anything, clenching and unclenching his fists. And the next day another 5 11-year-olds found Nick Farthing in the playground and told him they wanted their money back, and all the pocket money they'd handed over in the previous month, or they'd be going to the police. And now Nick Farthing was an extremely unhappy young man. Mo said, "It was him. He started it. If it wasn't for him, they'd have never thought of it on their own. He's the one we have to teach a lesson. Then they'll all behave." "Who?" said Nick. "The one who's always reading. The one from the library. Bob Owens. Him." Nick nodded slowly. Then he said, "Which one is he?" "I'll point him out to you," said Mo. Bod was used to being ignored. Where are we at? Okay. Bod was used to being ignored, to existing in the shadows. When glances naturally slip from you, you become very aware of eyes upon you, of glances in your direction, of attention. And if you barely exist in people's minds as another living person, then being pointed to, being followed around, these things draw attention to themselves. They followed him out of the school and up the road, past the corner newsagent and across the railway bridge. He took his time, making certain that the two who were following him, a burly boy and a fair, sharp-faced girl, did not lose him. Then he walked into the tiny churchyard at the end of the road, a miniature graveyard behind the local church, and he waited beside the tomb of Roderick Person and his wife Amabella, and also his second wife, Portunia. They sleep to wake again. "You're that kid," said a girl's voice. "Bob Owens." "Well, you're in really big trouble, Bob Owens." "It's Bod, actually," said Bod, and he looked at them, "with a D. And you're Jekyll and Hyde." "It was you," said the girl. "You got to the 7th formers." "So we're gonna teach you a lesson," said Nick Farthing, and he smiled without humor. "I quite like lessons," said Bod. "If you paid more attention to yours, you wouldn't have to blackmail younger kids for pocket money." Nick's brow crinkled. Then he said, "You're dead, Owens." Bod shook his head, and he gestured around him. "I'm not actually," he said, "but they are." "Who are?" said Mo. "The people in this place," said Bod. "Look, I brought you here to give you a choice." "You didn't bring us here," said Nick. "You're here," said Bod. "I wanted you here. I came here. You followed me. Same thing." Mo looked around nervously. "You got friends here?" she asked. Bod said, "You're missing the point, I'm afraid. You two need to stop this. Stop behaving like other people don't matter. Stop hurting people." Mo grinned a sharp grin. "For heaven's sake," she said to Nick, "hit him." "I gave you a chance," said Bod. Nick swung a vicious fist at Bod, who was no longer there, and Nick's fist slammed into the side of the gravestone. And that, my friends, is exactly where we are going to end. And I am going to put a pencil mark right there with our handy dandy pencil. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for being here, joining me, being patient as I work through things, technical difficulties. I appreciate you. And as always, love, peace, stay spooky.
Ciao.